Chapter 22. It was late when Tom Joe drove along the country road looking for the Weed Patch Camp. There were few lights in the countryside. Only a sky glare behind showed the direction of Bakersfield. The truck jiggled slowly along, and hunting cats left the road ahead of it. At a crossroad there was a little cluster of white wooden buildings. Ma was sleeping in the seat, and Pa had been silent and withdrawn for a long time. Tom said, "I don't know where she is. Maybe we'll wait till daylight and ask somebody." He stopped at a boulevard signal, and another car stopped at the crossroad. Tom leaned out. "Hey, mister, know where the big camp is at?" "Straight ahead." Tom pulled across into the opposite road. A few hundred yards, and then he stopped. A high wire fence faced the road, and a wide gated driveway turned in. A little way inside the gate, there was a small house with a light in the window. Tom turned in. The whole truck leapt into the air and crashed down again. "Jesus," Tom said, "I didn't even see that hump." A watchman stood up from the porch and walked to the car. He leaned on the side. "You hit her too fast," he said. "Next time you'll take it easy." "What is it, for God's sake?" The watchman laughed. "Well, a lot of kids play in here. You tell folks to go slow and they're liable to forget. Let them hit that hump once and they don't forget." "Oh, yeah. Hope I didn't break nothing. Say, you got any room for us here for us?" "Got one camp. How many of you?" Tom counted on his fingers. "Me and Pa and Ma, Al and Rosa Sharon and Uncle John and Ruthie Winfield. Them last is kids." "Well, I guess we can fix you. Got any camping stuff?" "Got a big tarp and beds." The watchman stepped up on the running board. "Drive down the end of that line and turn right. You'll be in number 4 sanitary unit." "What's that?" "Toilets and showers and wash tubs." Ma demanded. "Wash tubs? Running water?" "Sure." "Oh, praise God," said Ma. Tom drove down the long, dark row of tents. In the sanitary building, a little light burned. "Pull in here," the watchman said. "It's a nice place. Folks that had it just moved out." Tom stopped the car. "Right there?" "Yeah. Now you let the others on while I sign you up. Get to sleep. The camp committee will call on you in the morning and get you fixed up." Tom's eyes drew down. "Cops?" he asked. The watchman laughed. "No cops. We got our own cops. Folks here elect their own cops. Come along." Al dropped off the truck and walked around. "Gonna stay here?" "Yeah," said Tom. "You and Pa unload while I go to the office." "Be kind of quiet," the watchman said. "There's a lot of folks sleeping." Tom followed through the dark and climbed the office steps and entered a tiny room containing an old desk and a chair. The guard sat down at the desk and took out a form. "Name?" "Tom Joad." "That your father?" "Yeah." "His name?" "Tom Joad too." The questions went on. Where from, how long, in the state, what work done. The watchman looked up. "I'm not nosy. We gotta have stuff." "Sure," said Tom. "Now, got any money?" "Little bit." "You ain't destitute?" "Got a little." "Why?" "Well, a campsite costs $1 a week, but you can work it out. Carrying garbage, keeping the camp clean, stuff like that." "We'll work it out," said Tom. "You'll see the committee tomorrow. They'll show you how to use the camp and tell you the rules." Tom said, "Say, what is this? What committee is this anyway?" The watchman settled himself back. "Works pretty nice. There's five sanitary units. Each one elects a central committee man. Now that committee makes the laws. What they say goes. Suppose they get tough," Tom said. "Well, you can vote them out just as quick as you vote them in. They've done a fine job. Tell you what they did. You know, the holy roller preachers all the time followed the people around, preaching and talking and taking up collections. Well, they wanted to preach in this camp, and a lot of older folks wanted them. So it was up to the central committee. They went into the meeting, and here's how they fixed it. They say, any preacher can preach in this camp. Nobody can take up a collection in this camp." And it was kind of sad for the old folks, because there hasn't been a preacher in since. Tom laughed, and then he asked, You mean to say the fellas that run the camp is just fellas camping here?" "Sure, and it works. You said about cops. Central committee keeps order and makes rules. Then there's the ladies. They call you on your ma. They keep care of kids and look after the sanitary units. If your ma isn't working, she'll look after kids for the ones that isn't working. And when she gets a job, why, there'll be others. They sew, and a nurse comes out and teaches them. All kinds of things like that. You mean to say they ain't no cops? No, sir. No cop can come in here without a warrant. Well, suppose a fella's just mean, or drunk, and quarrelsome. What then? The watchman stabbed the blotter with a pencil. Well, the first time the Central Committee warns him, and the second time they really warn him. The third time they kick him out of the camp. God almighty, I can't hardly believe it. Tonight, the deputies and them fellows with the little caps, they burn the camp out by the river. They don't get in here, the watchman said. Some nights the boys patrol fences, especially dance nights. Dance nights? Jesus Christ. We got the best dances in the county every Saturday night. Well, for Christ's sakes, why ain't they more places like this? The watchman looked sullen. You're gonna have to find that out yourself. Go get some sleep. Good night, said Tom. Ma's gonna like this place. She ain't been treated decent for a long time. Good night, the watchman said. Get some sleep. The camp wakes up early. Tom walked down the street between the rows of tents. His eyes grew used to the starlight. He saw that the rows were straight and that there was no litter about the tents. The ground of the street had been swept and sprinkled. From the tents came the snores of sleeping people. The whole camp buzzed and snorted. Tom walked slowly. He neared number 4 sanitary unit and he looked at it curiously. An unpainted building, low and rough. Under a roof, but open at the sides, the rows of wash trays. He saw the Joe truck standing nearby and went to it quietly. The tarpaulin was pitched and the camp quiet, and as he drew near, a figure moved from the shadow of the truck and came toward him. Ma said softly, That you, Tom? Yeah, she said. They're all asleep. They was tired out. I ought to be asleep too, Tom said. Well, I just wanted to see you. Is it all right? It's nice, Tom said. I ain't gonna tell you. They'll tell you in the morning. You're gonna like it. She whispered, I heard they got hot water. Yeah, now you get to sleep. I don't know when you slept last. She begged. What ain't you gonna tell me? I ain't. You get to sleep. Suddenly, she seemed girlish. How could I sleep if I got to think about what you ain't gonna tell me? No, you don't, Tom said. First thing in the morning, you get on your other dress, and then you'll find out. I can't sleep with nothing like that hanging over me. You got to. Tom chuckled happily. You just got to. Good night, she said softly, and she bent down and slipped under the dark tarpaulin. Tom climbed up over the tailboard of the truck. He lay down on his back on the wooden floor, and he pillowed his head on his crossed hands, and his forearms pressed against his ears. The night grew cooler. Tom buttoned his coat over his chest and settled back again. The stars were clear and sharp over his head. It was still dark when he awakened. A small clashing noise brought him up from sleep. Tom listened and heard again the squeak of iron on iron. He moved stiffly and shivered in the morning air. The camp still slept. Tom stood up and looked over the side of the truck. The eastern mountains were blue-black, and as he watched, the light stood up faintly behind them, colored at the mountain rims with a washed red, then growing colder, grayer, darker as it went up overhead, until at a place near the western horizon it merged with pure night. Down in the valley, the earth was the lavender gray of dawn. The clash of iron sounded again. Tom looked down the line of tents, only a little lighter gray than the ground. Beside a tent, he saw a flash of orange fire seeping from the cracks in an old iron stove. Gray smoke spurted up from a stubby smoke pipe. Tom climbed over the truck's side and dropped to the ground. He moved slowly toward the stove. He saw a girl working about the stove, saw that she carried a baby on her crooked arm, and that the baby was nursing, its head up under the girl's shirtwaist. And the girl moved about, poking the fire, shifting the rusty stove lids to make a better draft, opening the oven door, and all the time the baby sucked, and the mother shifted it deftly from arm to arm. The baby didn't interfere with her work, or with the quick gracefulness of her movement. And the orange fire licked out of the stove cracks and threw flickering reflections on the tent. Tom moved closer. He smelled the frying bacon and the baking bread. From the east, the light grew swiftly. Tom came near to the stove and stretched his hands out. The girl looked at him and nodded so that her two braids jerked. "Good morning," she said, and she turned the bacon in the pan. The tent flap jerked up, and a young man came out and an older man followed him. They were dressed in new blue dungarees and in dungaree coats, stiff with filler, the brass buttons shining. They were sharp-faced men, and they looked much alike. The young man had a dark stubble beard, and the older man a white stubble beard. Their heads and faces were wet, their hair dripped, water stood in drops on their stiff beards. Their cheeks shone with dampness. Together they stood, looking quietly into the lightening east. They yawned together and watched the light on the hill rims, and then they turned and saw Tom. "Mornin'," the older man said, and his face was neither friendly nor unfriendly. "Mornin'," said Tom, and "Mornin'," said the younger man. The water slowly dried on their faces. They came to the stove and warmed their hands at it. The girl kept to her work. Once she set the baby down and tied her braids together in back with a string, and the two braids jerked and flung as she worked. She set tin cups on a big packing box, set tin plates and knives and forks out. Then she scooped bacon from the deep grease and laid it on a tin platter, and the bacon cricked and rustled as it grew crisp. She opened the rusty oven door and took out a square pan full of big high biscuits. When the smell of the biscuits struck the air, both of the men inhaled deeply. The younger said, "Christ," softly. "Now," the older man said to Tom, "had your breakfast?" "Well, no, I ain't, but my folks is over there. They ain't need to sleep." "Well, sit down with us then. We got plenty, thank God." "Why, thank you," Tom said. "It smells so darn good I couldn't say no." "Don't she?" the younger man asked. "Ever smell anything so good in your life?" They marched to the packing box and squatted around it. "Working around here?" the young man asked. "Aim to," said Tom. "We just got in last night. Ain't had no chance to look around." "We had 12 days' work," the young man said. The girl, working by the stove, and said, "They even got new clothes." Both men looked down at their stiff blue clothes, and they smiled a little shyly. The girl set out the platter of bacon and the brown high biscuits and a bowl of bacon gravy and a pot of coffee, and then she squatted down by the box, too. The baby, still nursed, its head up under the girl's shirtwaist. They filled their plates, poured bacon gravy over the biscuits, and sugared their coffee. The older man filled his mouth full, and he chewed and gulped and swallowed. "God Almighty, it's good," and he said, and he filled his mouth again. The younger man said, "We've been eating good for 12 days now. Never missed a meal in 12 days. None of us. Working and getting our pay and eating." He fell again, almost frantically, and refilled his plate. They drank the scalding coffee and threw the grounds to the earth and filled their cups again. There was color in the light now, a reddish gleam. The father and son stopped eating. They were facing to the east, and their faces were lighted by the dawn. The image of the mountain and the light coming over it were reflected in their eyes, and then they threw their grounds from their cups to the earth, and they stood up together. "Gotta get going," the older man said. The younger turned to Tom. "Looky," he said, we're laying some pipe. If you want to walk over with us, maybe we could get you on." Tom said, Well, that's mighty nice of you, and I sure thank you for the breakfast." "Glad to have you," the older man said. We'll try and get you working if you want." "You goddamn right I want," Tom said. "Just wait a minute, I'll tell my folks." He hurried to the Joe tent and bent over and looked inside. In the gloom under the tarpaulin, he saw lumps of sleeping figures, but a little movement started among the bedclothes. Ruthie came wriggling out like a snake, her hair down over her eyes and her dress wrinkled and twisted. She crawled carefully out and stood up. Her gray eyes were clear and calm from sleep, and mischief was not in them. Tom moved off from the tent and beckoned her to follow, and when he turned, she looked up at him. "Lord God, you're growing up," he said. She looked away in sudden embarrassment. "Listen here," Tom said. "Don't you wake up and nobody up, but when they get up, you tell 'em I got a chance at a job, and I'm a-going for it. Tell Ma I ate breakfast with some neighbors. You hear that?" Ruthie nodded and turned her head away, and her eyes were a little girl's eyes. "Don't you wake 'em up," Tom cautioned. He hurried back to his new friend. and Ruthie cautiously approached the sanitary unit and peeked in the open doorway. The two men were waiting when Tom came back. The young woman had dragged the mattress out and put the baby on it while she cleaned up the dishes. Tom said, "I wanted to tell my folks where I was. They wasn't awake." The three walked down the street between the tents. The camp had begun to come to life, and at the new fires the women worked, slicing meat, kneading dough for the morning's bread, and the men were stirring about the tents and about the automobiles. The sky was rosy now. In front of the office a lean old man raked the ground carefully. He so dragged his rake that the tine marks were straight and deep. "You're out early, Pa," the young man said as they went by. Yep, gotta make up my rent." "Rent, hell," the young man said. He was drunk last Saturday night, sung in his tent all night. Committee gave him work for that. They walked along the edge of the oiled road. A row of walnut trees grew beside the way. The sun shoved its edge over the mountains. Tom said, "Seems funny. I've eat your food, and I ain't told you my name, nor you ain't mentioned yours. I'm Tom Joad." The older man looked at him, and then he smiled a little. "You ain't been out here long?" "Hell no, just a couple days." "I knowed it. Funny. You get out of the habit of mentioning your name. They so goddamn many. Just fellas. Well, sir, I'm Timothy Wallace, and this here is my boy, Wilkie." "Proud to know ya," Tom said. "You been out here long?" 10 months, Wilkie said. "Got here right on the tail of the floods last year. Jesus, we had a time. Goddamn near starved to death." Their feet rattled on the oiled road. A truckload of men went by, and each man was sunk into himself. Each man braced himself in the truck bed and scowled down. "Going out for the gas company," Timothy said. "They got a nice job of it." "I could have took our truck," Tom suggested. "No." Timothy leaned down and picked up a green walnut. He tested it with his thumb, and then sheeted it at a black bird sitting on a fence wire. The bird flew up, let the nut sail under it, and then settled back on the wire and smoothed its shining black feathers with its beak. Tom asked, "Ain't you got no car?" Both Wallaces were silent, and Tom, looking at their faces, saw that they were ashamed. Wilkie said, "The place we work at is only a mile up the road." Timothy said angrily, "No, we ain't got no car. We sold our car. Had to. Run out of food, run out of everything. Couldn't get no job. Fellas come around every week, buying cars. Come around, and if you're hungry, why, they'll buy your car. And if you're hungry enough, they don't have to pay nothing for it. And we was hungry enough. Give us $10 for her." He spat into the road. Wilkie said quietly, "I was in Bakersfield last week. I seen her, a-sittin' in a used car lot, a-sittin' right there, and $75 was the sign on her." "We had to," Timothy said. "It was either us or let 'em steal our car, or us steal something from them. We ain't had to steal yet, but goddamn it, we've been close." Tom said, "You know, before we left home, we heard there was plenty of work out here. Seen handbills, asking folks to come out." "Yeah," Timothy said, "we seen 'em too. And they ain't much work, and wages coming down all the time. I get so goddamn tired just figuring how to eat." You got work now," Tom suggested. "Yeah, but it ain't gonna last long. Working for a nice fella. Got a little place. Works alongside of us. But hell, it ain't gonna last no time." Tom said, "Why in the hell you gonna get me on? I'll make it shorter. What you cutting your own throat for?" Timothy shook his head slowly. "I don't know. Got no sense, I guess. We figured to get us each a hat. Can't do it, I guess. There's the place, off to the right there. Nice job too. Getting 30 cents an hour. Nice friendly fella to work for." They turned off the highway and walked down a graveled road, through a small kitchen orchard, and behind the trees they came to a small white farmhouse, a few shade trees, and a barn. Behind the barn, a vineyard and a field of cotton. As the three men walked past the house, a screen door banged, and a stocky, sunburned man came down the back steps. He wore a paper sun helmet, and he rolled up his sleeves as he came across the yards. His heavy, sunburned eyebrows were drawn down in a scowl. His cheeks were sunburned in a beef red. "Morning, Tom and Mr. Thomas," Timothy said. "Morning." The man spoke irritably. Timothy said, "This here's Tom Joe. We wondered if you could see your way to put him on." Thomas scowled at Tom. Then he laughed shortly, and his brows were still scowled. "Oh, sure, I'll put him on. I'll put everybody on. Maybe I'll get 100 men on." "We just thought," Timothy began apologetically. Thomas interrupted him. "Yes, I've been thinking it, too." He swung around and faced them. "I got some things to tell you. I've been paying you 30 cents an hour, and that right?" "Why, sure, Mr. Thomas, but—" "And I've been getting 30 cents worth of work." His heavy, hard hands clasped each other. We try to give a good day of work." "Well, goddammit, this morning you getting 25 cents an hour, and you take it or leave it." The redness of his face deepened with anger. Timothy said, "We've give you a good work. You said so yourself." "I know it, but it seems like I ain't hiring my own men anymore." He swallowed. "Look, I got 65 acres here. Did you ever hear of the Farmers Association?" "Why, sure. Well, I belong to it. We had a meeting last night. Now, do you know who runs the Farmers Association?" "I'll tell you. The Bank of the West. That bank owns most of this valley, and it's got paper on it. Paper on everything it don't own. So last night, the member from the bank told me. He said, 'You're paying 30 cents an hour. You better cut it down to 25. And I said, "I've got good men. They're worth 30. And he says, "It isn't that." He says, "The wage is 25 now. If you pay 30, it'll only cause unrest. And by the way," he says, "you're going to need the usual amount for a crop loan next year." Thomas stopped. His breath was panting through his lips. "You see, the rate is 25 cents. And like it." "We done good work," Timothy said helplessly. "Ain't you got it yet? Mr. Bank hires 2,000 men, and I hire 3. I've got paper to meet. Now, if you can figure some way out, by Christ, I'll take it. They got me." Timothy shook his head. "I don't know what to say. You wait here." Thomas walked quickly to the house. The door slammed after him. In a moment he was back, and he carried a newspaper in his hand. "Did you see this? Here, I'll read it. Citizens. Angered at the red agitators, burned squatters' camp. Last night, a band of citizens, infuriated at the agitation going on in the local squatter camp, burned the tents to the ground and warned agitators to get out of the county." Tom began, "Why, I," and then he closed his mouth and was silent. Thomas folded the paper carefully and put it in his pocket. He had himself in control again. He said quietly, "Those men were sent out by the association. Now I'm giving them away. And if they ever find out I told, I won't have a farm next year." "I just don't know what to say," Timothy said. "If they was agitators, I can see why they was mad." Thomas said, "I watched it a long time. There's always red agitators just before a pay cut. Always. God damn it, they got me trapped. Now what are you going to do? 25 cents? Timothy looked at the ground. "I'll work," he said. "Me too," said Wilkie. "Seems like I walked into something. Sure, I'll work. I got to work." Thomas pulled the bandana out of his hip pocket and wiped his mouth and chin. "I don't know how long I can go on. I don't know how you men can feed a family on what you get now." "We can while we work," Wilkie said. "It's when we don't get work." Thomas looked at his watch. "Well, let's go out and dig some ditch, by God," he said. I'm going to tell you. You fellas live in that government camp, don't you?" Timothy stiffened. "Yes, sir." "Do you have dances every Saturday night?" Wilkie smiled. "We sure do." "Well, look out next Saturday night." Suddenly, Timothy straightened. He stepped close. "What do you mean?" "I belong to the Central Committee. I got to know." Thomas looked apprehensive. "Don't you ever tell I told." "What is it?" Timothy demanded. "Well, the association don't like the government camps. Can't get a deputy in there. The people make their own laws, I hear, and you can't arrest a man without a warrant. Now, if there was a big fight and maybe shooting, a bunch of deputies could go in, clean out the camp." Timothy had changed. His shoulders were straight and his eyes cold. "What you mean?" "Don't you ever tell where you heard," Thomas said uneasily. "There's going to be a fight in the camp, Saturday night, and there's going to be deputies ready to go in." Tom demanded, "Why, for God's sake? Those folks ain't bothering nobody." "I'll tell you why," Thomas said. Those folks in the camp are getting used to being treated like humans. They go back to the squatters' camp. They'll be hard to handle. He wiped his face again. Go on out to work now. Jesus, I hope I haven't talked myself out of my farm, but I like you people. Timothy stepped in front of him and put out a hard lean hand, and Thomas took it. Nobody won't know who told. We thank you. There won't be no fight. Go on to work, Thomas said. It's 25 cents an hour. We'll take it, Wilkie said. From you. Thomas walked away toward the house. I'll be out in a piece, he said. You men get to work. The screen door slammed behind him. The three men walked out, past the little whitewashed barn, and along a field edge. They came to a long, narrow ditch with sections of concrete pipe lying beside it. Here's where we're working, Wilkie said. His father opened the barn and passed out 2 picks and 3 shovels. And he said to Tom, here's your beauty. Tom hefted a pick. Jumping Jesus, if she don't feel good. Wait till about 11 o'clock, Wilkie suggested. See how good she feels then. They walked to the end of the ditch. Tom took off his coat and dropped it on the dirt pile. He pushed his cap and stepped into the ditch. Then he spat on his hands. The pick arose into the air and flashed down. Tom grunted softly. The pick rose and fell, and the grunt came at the moment it sank into the ground and loosened the soil. Wilkie said, Yes, sir, Pa, we got here, first grade muckstick man. This here boy been married to that there little digger. Tom said, I put in time, Yes, sir, I sure did, Put in my years, Kind of feel like. The soil loosened ahead of him. The sun cleared the fruit trees now, and the great leaves were golden green on the vines. 6 feet along, and Tom stepped aside and wiped his forehead. Wilkie came behind him. The shovel rose and fell, and the dirt flew out to the pile beside the lengthening ditch. I heard about this here Central Committee, said Tom. So you're one of them. Yes, sir, Timothy replied. And it's a responsibility. All them people, we're doing our best. And the people in the camp are doing their best. I wish them big farmers wouldn't plague us so. I wish they wouldn't. Tom climbed back into the ditch, and Wilkie stood aside. Tom said, How about this fight at the dance he told about? What they want to do that for? Timothy followed behind Wilkie, and Timothy's shovel beveled the bottom of the ditch and smoothed it, ready for the pipe. Seems like they got to drive us, Timothy said. They're scared we'll organize, I guess. And maybe they're right. This here camp is an organization. People there look out for themselves. Got the nicest strang band in these parts. Got a little charge account in the store for folks that's hungry. $5, you can get that much, and food and the camps'll stand good. We ain't never had no trouble with the law. Guess the big farmers are scared of that. Can't throw us in jail. Why? It scares them. Figure maybe if we can govern ourselves, maybe we'll do other things. Tom stepped clear of the ditch and wiped the sweat out of his eyes. You hear what the paper said about agitators up north of Bakersfield? Sure, they do it all the time. Well, I was there. There wasn't no agitators. It's what they call Reds. What the hell is these Reds anyway? Timothy scraped a little hell level in the bottom of the ditch. The sun made his white bristle beard shine. There's a lot of folks want to know what Reds is. He laughed. One of our boys found out. He patted the pile gently with his shovel. Fella named Hines. Got about 30,000 acres. Peach and grapes. Got a cannery and a winery. Well, he's all the time talking about them goddamn Reds. Goddamn Reds is driving the country to ruin, he says. And we gotta drive these here red bastards out. Well, they were a young fella just come out west, and he's listening one day. He kind of scratches his head, and he says, Mr. Hines, I ain't been here long. What is these goddamn Reds? Well, sir, Hines says, a Red is any son of a bitch that wants 30 cents when we're paying 25. Well, this young fella thinks about her, and he scratches his head, and he says, "Well, Jesus, Mr. Hines, I ain't a son of a bitch, but if that's what a red is, why, I want 30 cents an hour. Everybody does. Hell, Mr. Hines, we're all reds." Timothy drove his shovel along the ditch bottom, and the solid earth shone where the shovel cut at. Tom laughed too. Me too, I guess. His pick arced up and drove down, and the earth cracked under it. The sweat rolled down his forehead and down the sides of his nose, and it glistened on his neck. "Damn it," he said. "A pick is a nice tool, if you don't fight it, You and the pick, working together, In line, the three men worked, and the ditch inched along, and the sun shone hotly down on them in the growing morning. When Tom left her, Ruthie gazed in at the door of the sanitary unit for a while. Her courage was not strong without Winfield to boast for. She put a bare foot in on the concrete floor and then withdrew it. Down the line, a woman came out of the tent and started a fire in a tin camp stove. Ruthie took a few steps in that direction, but she could not leave. She crept to the entrance of the Joad tent and looked in. On one side, lying on the ground, lay Uncle John, his mouth open and his snores bubbling spittily in his throat. Ma and Pa were covered with the comfort, their heads in, away from the light. Hal was on the far side from Uncle John, and his arm was flung over his eyes. Near the front of the tent, Rosa Sharon and Winfield lay, and there was a space where Ruthie had been, beside Winfield. She squatted down and peered in. Her eyes remained on Winfield's tow head, and as she looked, the little boy opened his eyes and stared out at her, and his eyes were solemn. Ruthie put her finger to her lips and beckoned with her other hand. Winfield rolled his eyes over to Rosa Sharon. Her pink, flushed face was near to him, and her mouth was open a little. Winfield carefully loosened the blanket and slipped out. He crept out of the tent cautiously and joined Ruthie. "How long you been up?" he whispered. She led him away with elaborate caution, and when they were safe, she said, "I never been to bed. I was up all night." "He was not," Winfield said. "You're a dirty liar." "All right," she said. "If I'm a liar, I ain't gonna tell you nothing that happened. I ain't gonna tell how the fella got killed with a stab knife and how they was bear come in and took off a little chili." They wasn't no bear," Winfield said uneasily. He brushed up his hair with his fingers and he pulled down his overalls at the crotch. "All right, they wasn't no bear," she said sarcastically, "and they wasn't no white things made out of dish stuff like in the catalogs." Winfield regarded her gravely. He pointed to the sanitary unit. "In there?" he asked. "I'm a dirty liar," Ruthie said. "It ain't gonna do me no good to tell stuff to you." "Let's go look," Winfield said. "I already been," Ruthie said. "I already sat on him. I even peed on him." "You never neither," said Winfield. They went to the unit building, and that time Ruthie was not afraid. Boldly, she led the way into the building. The toilets lined one side of the large room, and each toilet had its compartment with a door in front of it. The porcelain was gleaming, and basins lined another wall, while on the third wall were 4 shower compartments. "There," said Ruthie. "Them's toilets. I seen 'em in the catalog." The children drew near to one of the toilets. Ruthie, a burst of bravado, boosted her skirt and sat down. "I told you I'd been here," she said, and to prove it, there was a little tinkle of water in the bowl. Winfield felt I was embarrassed. His hand twisted the flushing lever. There was a roar of water, and Ruthie leapt into the air and jumped away. She and Winfield stood in the middle of the room and looked at the toilet. The hiss of water continued in it. "You done it," Ruthie said. "You went and broke it. I seen you." "I never. Honest, I never." "I seen you," Ruthie said. "You just ain't to be trusted with no nice stuff." Winfield sucked his chin. He looked up at Ruthie, and his eyes filled with tears. His chin quivered, and Ruthie was instantly contrite. Never you mind," she said. "I won't tell on you. We'll pretend like she was already broke. We'll pretend we ain't even been here." She led him out of the building. The sun, lipped over the mountains by now, shone on the corrugated iron roofs of the 5 sanitary units, shone on the gray tents and on the swept ground of the streets between the tents. And the camp was waking up. The fires were burning in camp stoves, and the stoves made of kerosene cans and of sheet metals. The smell of smoke was in the air. Tent flaps were thrown back, and people moved about in the streets. In front of the Joe tent, Ma stood up, looking up and down the street. She saw the children and came over to them. "I was worrying," Ma said. "I didn't know where you was." "We was just looking," Ruthie said. "Well, where's Tom? You seen him?" Ruthie became important. "Yes, ma'am. Tom, he got up, and he told me what to tell you." She paused to let her importance be apparent. "Well, what?" Ma demanded. "He said to tell you." She paused again and looked to see that Winfield had appreciated her position. Ma raised her hand and the back of it toward Ruthie. "What?" "He got work," said Ruthie quickly. "Went out to work." She looked apprehensively at Ma's raised hand. The hand sank down again, and then it reached out for Ruthie. Ma embraced Ruthie's shoulders in a quick, convulsive hug, and then released her. Ruthie stared at the ground in embarrassment and changed the subject. "They got toilets over there, white ones," she said. "You been in there?" "Me and Winfield," she said, and then treacherously. "Winfield, he busted toilet." Winfield turned red. He glared at Ruthie. "She peed in one," he said viciously. Ma was apprehensive. "Now, what did you do? You show me." She forced them to the door and inside. "Now, what did you do?" She pointed. It was a hissing and a swishing. "Stop now. Show me what you done," Ma demanded. Winfield went reluctantly to the toilet. "I didn't push it hard," he said. "I just had a hold of this here, and..." The swish of water came again. He leaped away. Ma threw her head back and laughed, while Ruthie and Winfield regarded her resentfully. "That's the way she works," Ma said. "I seen them before. When you finish, you push that." The shame of their ignorance was too great for the children. They went out the door, and they walked down the street to stare at a large family eating breakfast. Ma watched them out of the door, and then she looked about the room. She went to the shower closets and looked in. She walked to the wash basins and ran her finger over the white porcelain. She turned the water on a little, and she held her finger in the stream and jerked her hand away when the water came hot. For a moment she regarded the basin, and then, setting the plug, she filled the bowl a little with some from the hot faucet and a little from the cold. And then she washed her hands in the warm water, and she washed her face. She was brushing water through her hair and her fingers when a step sounded on the concrete floor behind her. Ma swung around. An elderly man stood looking at her with an expression of righteous shock. He said harshly, "How you coming here?" Ma gulped. She felt the water dripping from her chin and soaking through her dress. "I didn't know," she said apologetically. "I thought this here was for folks to use." The elderly man frowned on her. "For men folks," he said sternly. He walked to the door and pointed at a sign on it. "Men," he said. "That proves it. Didn't you see that?" "No," Ma said in shame. "I never seen it. Ain't they a place where I can go?" The man's anger departed. "You just come?" he asked more kindly. "Middle of the night," said Ma. "Then you ain't talked to the committee?" "What committee?" "Why, the ladies' committee." "No, I ain't," he said proudly. "The committee will call on you pretty soon and fix you up. We take care of folks that just come in. Now, if you want a ladies' toilet, you just go on the other side of the building. That side's yours." Ma said uneasily, "You say, a ladies' committee coming into my tent?" He nodded his head. "Pretty soon, I guess." "Thank you," said Ma. She hurried out and half ran to the tent. "Pa," she said, "John, get up. You, Al, get up and get washed." Startled, sleepy eyes looked out at her. "All of you," Ma cried, "you get up and get your face washed. And comb your hair." Uncle John looked pale and sick. There was a red, bruised place on his chin. Pa demanded, "What's the matter?" "The committee," Ma cried. "There's a committee, a ladies' committee, a-comin' to visit. Get up now and get washed. And while we was a-sleepin' and a-snorin', Tom went out and got work. Get up now." They came sleepily out of the tent. Uncle John staggered a little, and his face was pained. "Get over to that house and wash up," Ma ordered. "We got to get breakfast and be ready for the committee." She went to a little pile of split wood in the camp lot. She started a fire and put up her cooking irons. "Pone," she said to herself. "Pone and gravy. That's quick. Gotta be quick." She talked on to herself, and Ruthie and Winfield stood by, wondering. The smoke of the morning fires arose all over the camp, and the mutter of talk came from all sides. Rose Sharon, unkempt and sleepy-eyed, crawled out of the tent. Ma turned from the cornmeal. She was measuring her in fistfuls. She looked at the girl's wrinkly, dirty dress and her frizzled, uncombed hair. "You got to clean up," she said briskly. "Go right over and clean up. You got a clean dress. I washed it. Get your hair combed. Get the seeds out of your eyes." Ma was excited. Rose Sharon said sullenly, "I don't feel good. I wish Connie would come. I don't feel like doing nothing without Connie." Ma turned full around on her. The yellow cornmeal clung to her hands and wrists. "Rose Sharon," she said sternly, "you get up, right? You just been moping enough. There's a ladies' committee a-comin', and the family ain't gonna be frowny when they get here. But I don't feel good." Ma advanced on her, mealy hands held out. "Get. There's a time when how you feel got to be kept to yourself." "I'm a-going to vomit," Rose Sharon whined. "Well, go and vomit, 'cause you're gonna vomit. Everybody does. Get it over, and then you clean up, and wash your legs, and put on them shoes of yours." She turned back to her work. "And braid your hair," she said. A frying pan of grease sputtered over the fire, and it splashed and hissed when Ma dropped the pone in with the spoon. She mixed flour with grease in a kettle and added water and salt and stirred the gravy. The coffee began to turn over in the gallon can, and the smell of coffee arose from it. Pa wandered back from the sanitary unit, and Ma looked critically up. Pa said, "You say Tom's got work?" "Yes, sir. Went out 'fore we was awake. Now look in the box and get you some clean overalls and a shirt. And Pa, I'm awful busy. You get Ruthie and Winfield's ears. They's hot water. Will you do that? Scrounge around in their ears good, and their necks. Get 'em red and shining." "Never seen you so bubbly," Pa said. Ma cried, "This here's the time the family got to get decent. Come across, they wasn't no chance, but now we can. Throw your dirty overalls in the tent, and I'll wash 'em out." Pa went inside the tent, and in a moment he came out with pale blue washed overalls and a shirt on. He led the sad and startled children toward the sanitary unit. Ma called after him, "Scrounge around good in their ears." Uncle John came to the door of the men's side and looked out, and then he went back and sat on the toilet for a long time and held his aching head in his hands. Ma had taken up a pan-load of brown pone and was dipping spoons of dough in the grease for a second pan when a shadow fell on the ground beside her. She looked over her shoulder. A little man dressed in all white stood behind her, a man with thin, brown-lined face and merry eyes. He was lean as a picket. His white, clean clothes were frayed at the seams. He smiled at Ma. "Good morning," he said. Ma looked at his white clothes, and her face hardened with suspicion. "Morning," she said. "Are you Miss Jode?" "Yes." "Well, I'm Jim Raleigh. I'm camp manager. Just dropped by to see if everything's all right. Got everything you need?" Ma studied him suspiciously. "Yes," she said. Raleigh said, "I was asleep when you came last night. Lucky we had a place for you." His voice was warm. Ma said simply, "It's nice, especially them wash tubs. You wait till the women get to washing. Pretty soon now. You never heard such a fuss. Like a meeting. Know what they did yesterday, Miss Jode? They had a chorus, singing a hymn tune and rubbing the clothes all in time. That was something to hear, I tell you." The suspicion was going out of Ma's face. "Must have been nice. You're the boss?" "No," he said. "The people here worked me out of a job. They keep the camp clean. They keep order. They do everything. I never saw such people. They're making clothes in the meeting hall, and they're making toys. Never saw such people." Ma looked down at her dirty dress. "We ain't clean yet," she said. You just can't keep clean and traveling." "Don't I know it," he said. He sniffed the air. "Say, is that your coffee smells so good?" Ma smiled. "It does smell nice, doesn't it? Outside it always smells nice." And she said proudly, "We'd take it in honor if you'd have some breakfast with us." He came to the fire and squatted on his hams, and the last of Ma's resistance went down. "We'd be proud to have you," she said. "We ain't got much that's nice, but you're welcome." The little man grinned at her. "I had my breakfast, but I'd sure like a cup of coffee. It smells so good." Why, sure. Don't hurry yourself." Ma poured a tin cup of coffee from the gallon can. She said, "We ain't got sugar yet. Maybe we'll get some today. If you need sugar, it won't taste good." "Never used sugar," he said, spoils the taste of good coffee. Well, I like a little sugar, said Ma. She looked at him suddenly and closely to see how he had become so close so quickly. She looked for a motive on his face and found nothing but friendliness. Then she looked at the frayed seams on his white coat, and she was reassured. He sipped the coffee. I guess the ladies will be here to see you this morning. We ain't clean, Ma said. They shouldn't be coming till we get cleaned up a little. But they know how it is, the manager said. They came in the same way. No, sir. The committees are good in this camp because they do know. He finished his coffee and stood up. Well, I gotta go on. Anything you want, why, come over to the office. I'm there all the time. Grand coffee. Thank you. He put the cup on the box with the others, and he waved his hand and walked down the line of the tents. And Ma heard him speaking to people as he went. Ma put down her head, and she fought a desire to cry. Pa came back leading the children, and their eye was still wet with pain from the ear scrounging. They were subdued and shining. The sunburned skin on Winfield's nose was scrubbed off. There, Pa said, got dirt and 2 layers of skin. Had almost a lick them to make them stand still. Ma praised them. They look nice, she said. Help yourself to pone and gravy. We gotta get stuff out of the way and the tent in order. Pa served the plates for the children and himself. Wonder where Tom got work. I don't know. Well, if he can, we can. Al came excitedly into the tent. What a place, he said. He helped himself and poured coffee. Know what the fellow's doing? He's building a house trailer right over there. Back of them tents. Got beds and a stove and everything, just to live in her. By God, that's a way to live. Right where you stop. That's where you live. Ma said, I'd rather have a little house. As soon as we can, I want a little house. Pa said, Al, after we eat, you and me and Uncle John will take the truck and go out looking for work. Sure, said Al. I'd like to get a job in a garage if there's any jobs. That's what I'd really like. And give me a little old cut-down Ford. Paint her yellow and go a-cudling around. Seen a pretty girl on the road. Give her a big wink, too. Pretty as hell, too. Pa said sternly, you better get you some work before you go tomcatting. Uncle John came out of the toilet and moved slowly near. Mom frowned at him. You ain't washed, he began, and then she saw how sick and weak and sad he looked. You go in the tent and lay down, she said. You ain't well. He shook his head. No, he said. I sinned, and I got to take my punishment. He squatted down disconsolately and poured himself a cup of coffee. Ma took the last bones from the pan. She said casually, the manager of the camp come and sit and had a cup of coffee. Pa looked over slowly. Yeah? What's he want already? Just come to pass the time, Ma said daintily. Just sat down and had coffee. Said he didn't get good coffee so often and smelled hard. What did he want? Pa demanded. Didn't want nothing. Come to see how we was getting on. I don't believe it, Pa said. He's probably a snootin' and a smelling around. He was not, Ma cried angrily. I can tell a fellow that's snooting around quick as the next person. Pa tossed his coffee grounds out of his cup. You got to quit that, Ma said. This here's a clean place. You should see when she don't get so goddamn clean a fellow can't live in her, Pa said jealously. Hurry up, Al. We're going out looking for a job. Al wiped his mouth with his hand. I'm ready, he said. Pa turned to Uncle John. You a-comin'? Yes, I'm a-comin'. You don't look so good. I ain't so good, but I'm comin'. Al got in the truck. Have to get gas, he said. He started the engine. Pa and Uncle John climbed in beside him, and the trucks moved away down the street. Ma watched them go, and then she took a bucket and went to the wash trays under the open part of the sanitary unit. She filled her bucket with hot water and carried it back to her camp, and she was washing the dishes in the bucket when Rosa Sharon came back. I put your stuff on a plate, Ma said, and she looked closely at the girl. Her hair was dripping and combed, and her skin was bright and pink. She had put on a blue dress printed with little white flowers. On her feet she wore the heel slippers of her wedding. She blushed under Ma's gaze. You had a bath, Ma said. Rosa Sharon spoke huskily. I was in there when a lady come in and done it. Know what you do? You get in a little stall-like and you turn the handles and water comes flooding down you. Hot water or cold water, just like you want it. And I done it. I'm a-going myself, Ma cried, just as soon as I can get finished here. You show me how. I'm gonna do it every day, the girl said, and that lady, she seen me, and she seen the baby about the baby. You know what she said? She said there's a nurse that comes every week, and I'm gonna go see that nurse, and she'll tell me just what to do so the baby will be strong. Says all the ladies here do that, and I'm gonna do it. The words bubbled out. And you know what? Last week there was a baby born, and the whole camp give a party, and they give clothes, and they give stuff for the baby, even give a baby buggy, wicker one. Wasn't new, but they gave a coat of pink paint, and it was just like new. And they gave the baby a name and had a cake. Oh Lord, she subsided, breathing heavily. Ma said, "Praise God, we come home to our own people. I'm gonna have a bath." "Oh, it's nice," the girl said. Ma wiped the tin dishes and stacked them. She said, "We're the Jodes. We don't look up to nobody. Grandpa's grandpa. He fit in the revolution. We was farm people till the dead. And then, them people, they done something to us. Every time they come, seemed like they was a whipping me, all of us. And in Needles, that police, he done something to me, made me feel mean, made me feel ashamed, and now I ain't ashamed. These folks is our folks. And that manager, he come and sat and drank coffee, and he says, 'Miss Jode this, and Miss Jode that, and how you getting on, Miss Jode?' She stopped and sighed. 'Why, I feel like people again.' She stacked the last dish. She went into the tent and dug through the clothes box for her shoes and a clean dress, and she found a little paper package with her earrings in it. And as she went past Rosa Sharon, she said, 'If them ladies come, you tell them I'll be right back.' She disappeared around the side of the sanitary unit. Rosa Sharon sat down heavily on a box and regarded her wedding shoes, black patent leather, and tailored black bows. She wiped the toes with her finger and wiped her finger on the inside of her skirt. Leaning down put a pressure on her growing abdomen. She sat up straight and touched herself with exploring fingers, and she smiled a little as she did it. Along the road, a stocky woman walked, carrying an apple box of dirty clothes toward the wash tubs. Her face was brown with sun, and her eyes were black and intense. She wore a great apron, made from a cotton bag, over her gingham dress, and men's brown Oxfords were on her feet. She saw that Rose Sharon caressed herself, and she saw a little smile on the girl's face. "So," she cried, and she laughed with pleasure, "what do you think it's going to be?" Rose Sharon blushed and looked down at the ground, and then peeked up at it, and the tiny little shiny black eyes of the woman took her in. "I don't know," she mumbled. The woman plopped the apple box on the ground. "Got a live tumor," she said, and she cackled like a happy hen. "Which you'd rather?" she demanded. "I don't know. Boy, I guess." "Sure, boy. You just come in, didn't ya? Last night. Late. Gonna stay?" "I don't know. If we can get work, I guess we will." A shadow crossed the woman's face, and the little black eyes grew fierce. "If you can get work. That's what we all say. My brother got a job already for this morning." "Did, huh? Maybe you're lucky." "Look out for luck. You can't trust luck." She stepped close. "You can only get one kind of luck. Can't have more." "You'd be a good girl," she said fiercely. "You be good. If you got sin on you, you better watch out for that there baby." She squatted down in front of Rose Sharon. "There's scandalous things that goes on in this here camp," she said darkly. "Every Saturday night there's dancing. And not only square dancing either. There's some that does clutch and hug dancing. I seen 'em." Rose Sharon said guardedly, "I like dancing, square dancing," and she added virtuously, "I never done that other kind." The brown woman nodded her head dismally. "Well, some does, and the Lord ain't letting it get by neither. And don't you think he is?" "No, ma'am," the girl said softly. The woman put one brown, wrinkled hand on Rose Sharon's knee, and the girl flinched under the touch. "You let me warn you now. They ain't but a few deep down Jesus lovers left. Every Saturday night, when that strange band starts up and should be playing hymnody, they're a reelin'. Yes, sir, a reelin'. I seen 'em. Won't go near myself, nor do I let my kid near. They's a clutch and hug, I tell ya." She paused for emphasis, and then said in a hoarse whisper, "They do more. They give a stage play." She backed away and cocked her head to see how Rose Sharon would take such a revelation. Actors, the girl said in awe. No, sir, the woman exploded. Not actors, not them already damned people. Our own kind of folks, our own people. And they was little children, didn't know no better. In it, and they was pretending to be stuff they wasn't. I didn't go near, but I heard 'em talking about what they was doing. The devil was just a strutting through this here camp. Rosa Sharon listened, and her eyes and mouth open. Once in school, we give a Christ child play. Christmas. Well, I ain't saying that's bad or good. There's good folks in it thinks that Christ child is all right. But well, I wouldn't care to come right out flat and say so. But this here wasn't no Christ child. This here was a sin and delusion and devil stuff, strutting and parading and speaking like they're somebody they ain't, and dancing and clutching and a hugging. Rose Sharon sighed, and not just a few neither, the brown woman went on. Getting so you can almost count the deep down lamb blood folks on your toes. And don't you think them sinners is putting nothing over on God, neither. No, sir, he's a chalking him up sin by sin, and he's drawn his line and added him up sin by sin. God's a-watching, and I'm a-watching. He already smoked 2 of them out. Rose Sharon panted. Has? The brown woman's voice was rising in intensity. I seen it. Girl carrying a little one just like you, and she play acted and she hug danced, and the voice grew bleak and ominous. She thinned out and she skinnied out, and she dropped that baby dead. Oh my! The girl was pale, dead and bloody. Of course nobody wouldn't speak to her no more. She had to go away. Can't teach sin without catching it. No, sir. And there was another, done the same thing, and she skinnied out. And know what? One night she was gone, and 2 days back, she's back. Says she was visiting, but she ain't got no baby. Know what I think? I think the manager, he took her away to drop her baby. He don't believe in sin. Told me himself. Says the sin is being hungry. Says the sin is being cold. Says, I tell you, he told me himself. Can't see God in them things. Says them girls skinny out because they didn't get enough food. Well, I fixed them up. She rose to her feet and stepped back. Her eyes were sharp. She pointed a rigid forefinger in Rose Sharon's face. I says, get back, I says, I know the devil was rampaging in this here camp. Now I know who the devil is. Get back, Satan, I says. And by Christ he got back. Trembling he was, and sneaky. Says, please, don't make them the folks unhappy. I says, unhappy? How about their soul? How about them dead babies and them poor sinners ruined counterplay acting? He just looked and gave a sick grin and went away. He knowed when he met a real testifier to the Lord. He says, I'm helping Jesus watch the goings on, and you and them other sinners ain't getting away with it. She picked up her box of dirty clothes. You take heed, I warned you. You take heed that poor child in your belly, and keep out of sin. And she strode away, titanically, and her eyes shone with virtue. Rosa Sharon watched her go, and then she put her head down in her hands and whimpered into her palms. A soft voice sounded beside her. She looked up, ashamed. It was the little white-clad manager. Don't you worry, he said. Don't you worry. Her eyes blinded with tears. But I done it, she said. I hug danced. I didn't tell her. I done it in Salsa. Me and Connie. Don't worry, he said. She said I'll drop the baby. I know she does. I kind of keep my eye on her. She's a good woman, but she makes people unhappy. Rose Sharon sniffled wetly. She knowed 2 girls lost their baby right in this here camp. The manager squatted down in front of her. Look, he said, listen to me. I know them too. They were too hungry and too tired, and they worked too hard, and they rode on a truck over bumps. They were sick. It wasn't their fault. But she said, don't worry about that. That woman likes to make trouble. But she says you was the devil. I know she does. That's because I won't let her make people miserable. He patted her shoulder. Don't you worry. She doesn't know. And he walked away quickly. Rose Sharon looked after him. His lean shoulders jerked as he walked. She was still watching his slight figure when Ma came back, clean and pink, her hair combed and wet, and gathered in a knot. She wore her figured dress and the old cracked shoes, and the little earrings hung in her ears. I done it, she said. I stood in there and let the warm water come a-flooding and a-flowing down over me. And there was a lady says you can do it every day if you want. And them And them ladies come yet? Said the girl. And you just sat there and didn't read up the camp none? Ma gathered the tin dishes as she spoke. We got to get in shape, she said. Come on, stir. Get that sack and kinda sweep along the ground. She picked up the equipment, put the pans in their box, and the box in the tent. Get them beds neat, she ordered. I tell you, I ain't never felt nothing so nice as that water. Rose Sharon listlessly followed Oils. You think Connie will be back today? Maybe, maybe not. Can't tell. You sure he knows where at to come? Sure. Ma, you don't think they could have killed him when they burned? Not him, Ma said confidently. He can travel when he wants. Jackrabbit, quick and fox sneaky. I wished he'd come. He'll come when he comes. Ma, I wish you'd get to work. Well, do you think that dancing and play acting is sins and it'll make me drop baby? Ma stopped her work and put her hands on her hips. Now what you talking about? You ain't done no play acting? Well, some folks here done it, and one girl, she dropped her baby, dead and bloody, and like it was judgment. Ma stared at her. Who told you? Lady that come by. And that little fellow in white clothes, he come by and he says it ain't what it done it. Ma frowned. Rose Sharon, she said, you stop picking at yourself. You just a-choosing yourself up to cry. I don't know what's come at you. Our folks ain't never did that. They took what come to him dry-eyed. I bet it's that Connie give you all them notions. He was just too big for his overalls. And she said sternly, Rose Sharon, you're just one person, and there's a lot of other folks. You get your proper place. I know people build theirself up with sin till they figured they was a big mean shucks in the sight of the Lord. But Ma, no, just shut up and get to work. You ain't big enough or mean enough to worry God much. And I'm gonna give you the back of my hand if you don't stop this picking at yourself. She swept the ashes into the fire hole and brushed the stones on its edge. She saw the committee coming along the road. Get working, she said. Here's the ladies coming. Get working now, so as I can be proud. She didn't look again, but she was conscious of the approach of the committee. There was no doubt that it was a committee. 3 ladies, washed, dressed in their best clothes. A lean woman with stringy hair and steel-rimmed glasses. A small, stout lady with curly gray hair and a small, sweet mouth. And a mammoth lady, big of hock and buttock, big of breast, muscled like a dray horse, powerful and sharp. And the committee walked down the road with dignity. Ma managed to have her back turned when they arrived. They stopped, wheeled, stood in line, and the great woman boomed, Mornin', Miss Jode, ain't it? Ma whirled around as though she had been caught off guard. Why, yes. How do you know my name? We're the committee, the big woman said. Ladies' Committee of Sanitary Unit number 4. We got your name in the office. Ma flustered. We ain't in very good shape yet. I'd be proud to have you ladies come sit while I make some coffee. The plump committee woman continued. Give our names. Jessie. Mention our names to Miss Judd. Jessie's the chair, she explained. Jessie said formally, Miss Judd, this here is Annie Littlefield and Ella Summers, and I'm Jessie Bullock. I'm proud to make your acquaintance, Ma said. Once you sit down, there ain't nothing to sit on yet, she added, but I'll make up some coffee. Oh no, said Annie formally. Don't put yourself out. We just come to see how you was and try to make you feel at home. Jessie Bullock said sternly. Annie, I'll thank you. Remember, I'm chair. Oh, sure. But next week I am. Oh, well, we'll wait. You wait until the next week. We change every week, she explained to Mom. Sure you wouldn't like a little coffee? Ma asked helplessly. No, thank you. Jessie took charge. We're going to show you about the sanitary unit first, and then, if you want to, we'll sign you up in the ladies' club and give you duty. Of course, you don't have to get joined. Does it cost much? Don't cost nothing but work. And when you're knowed, maybe you can be elected to this committee. Annie interrupted. Jessie here is on the committee for the whole camp. She's a big committee lady. Jessie smiled with pride. Elected unanimous, she said. Well, Miss Jode, I guess it's time we told you about the camp, how the camp runs. Ma said, this here's my girl, Rose Sharon. How do, they said. Better come along too. The huge Jessie spoke, and her manner was full of dignity and kindness, and her speech was rehearsed. You shouldn't think we're butting in your business, Miss Jode. This here camp got a lot of stuff everybody uses, and we got rules we made ourselves. Now we're going to the unit. That there everybody uses, and everybody got to take care of it. They strolled to the unroofed section where the wash trays were, 20 of them. 8 were in use. The woman bending over, scrubbing the clothes, and the piles of wrung-out clothes were heaped on the concrete floor. Now, you can use these here any time you want, Jessie said. Only thing, you gotta leave them clean. The woman who were washing looked up with interest. Jessie said loudly, "This here is Miss Judd and Rose Sharon, come to live." They greeted Ma in a chorus, and Ma made a little dumpy bow at them and said, "Proud to meet you." Jessie led the committee to the toilet and shower area. "I've been here already," Ma said. "I even took a bath." "That's what they're here for," Jessie said, "and there's the same rule. You gotta leave them clean. Every week there's a new committee to swap out once a day. Maybe you'd get on that committee. You gotta bring your own soap." "We gotta get some soap," Ma said. "We're all out." Jessie's voice became almost reverential. "You ever use this here kind?" she said, and pointed at the toilets. "Yes, ma'am, right this morning." Jessie sighed. "That's good." Ella Summers said, "Just last week." Jessie interrupted sternly. "Miss Summers, I'll tell." Ella gave ground. "Oh, all right." Jessie said, "Last week when you was chair, you done it all. I'll thank you to keep out this week." "Well, tell what that lady done," Ella said. "Well," said Jessie, "it ain't this committee's business to go babbling, but I won't pass no name. Lady came in last week, and she got in here before the committee got to her, and she had old man's pants in the toilet, and she says, 'It's too low, it ain't big enough. Bust your back over her,' she says. Why couldn't they stick her higher?" The committee smiled, superior smiles. Ella broke in, says, "Can't put enough in at once." And Ella weathered Jessie's stern glance. Jessie said, "We got our troubles with toilet paper. Rule says you can't take none away from here." She clicked her tongue sharply. "Whole camp chips in for toilet paper." For a moment she was silent, and then she confessed, "Number 4 is using more than any other. Somebody's a stealing it. Come up in the general ladies' meeting." Ladies sided. "Unit number 4 is using too much. Come right up in the meeting." Ma was following the conversation breathlessly. "Stealing it? What for?" "Well, we had trouble before. Last time there was 3 little girls cutting paper dolls out of it. Well, we caught them, but this time we don't know. Hardly put a roll for it's gone. Come right up in the meeting. One lady says we ought to have a little bell that rings every time the roll turns once. Then we can count how many everybody takes." She shook her head. "I just don't know," she said. "I've been worried all week. Somebody's stealing toilet paper from Unit 4. From the doorway came a whining voice. "Miss Bullitt?" The committee turned. "Miss Bullitt, I heard what you say." A flushed, perspiring woman stood in the doorway. "I thought I could get up in the meeting, Miss Bullitt. I just couldn't. They'd laugh or something." "What are you talking about?" Jessie advanced. "Well, maybe it's us, but we ain't stealing, Miss Bullitt." Jessie advanced on her, and the perspiration beaded out on the flusty confessor. "We can't help it, Miss Bullitt." "Now tell what you're telling," Jessie said. "This here's unit's suffered a shame about that toilet paper. All week, Miss Bullitt. We couldn't help it. You know I got 5 girls." "What they been a-doing with it?" Jessie demanded ominously. "Just using it. Honest, just using it. They ain't got the right. 4 or 5 sheets is enough. What's the matter with them?" The confessor bleated. "Skitters, all 5 of them. We've been low on money. They ate green grapes. They all 5 got howlin' skitters. Run out every 10 minutes." She defended them. "But they ain't stealing." Jessie sighed. "You should have told," she said. "You got to tell. Here's Unit 4 suffering shame because you never told. Anybody can get the skitters." The meek voice whined. "I just can't keep them from eating green grapes, and they're getting worse all the time." Ella Summers burst out. "The aid. She gotta get the aid." "Ella Summers," Jessie said, "I'm a-telling you for the last time. You ain't the chair." She turned back to the rattled little woman. "Ain't you got no money, Miss Joyce?" She looked ashamedly down. "No, but we might get work any time." "Now hold your head, Jessie said. "That ain't no crime. You just waltz right over to the weed patch store and get you some groceries." The camp got $20 credit there. You get yourself $5 worth, and you can pay back the Central Committee when you get work. Miss Joyce, you know that, she said sternly. How come you let your girls get hungry? We ain't never took no charity, Miss Joyce said. This ain't charity, and you know it, Jessie raged. We had all that out. They ain't no charity in this here camp. We won't have no charity. Now you waltz right over and get you some groceries, and you bring the slip up to me, Miss Joyce said timidly. Suppose we can't never pay? We ain't had work for a long time. You'll pay if you can. If you can't, that ain't none of our business, and it ain't your business. One fella went away, and 2 months later, he sent back the money. You ain't got the right to let your girls get hungry in this here camp, ma'am. Miss Joyce was cowed. Yes, ma'am, she said. Get yourself some cheese for them girls, Jessie ordered. That'll take care of them skitters. Yes, ma'am, and Miss Joyce cuddled out the door. Jessie turned in anger at the committee. She got no right to be stiff-necked. She got no right, not with our own people. Annie Littlefield said, She ain't been here long. Maybe she don't know. Maybe she took charity one time or another. Now, Annie said, don't you try and shut me up. Jessie, I got a right to pass speech. She turned half to Ma. If a body's ever took a charity, it makes a bum burn that don't ever come out. This ain't charity, but if you ever took it, you don't forget it. I bet Jessie ain't ever done it. No, I ain't, said Jessie. Well, I did, Annie said. Last winter, and we was a-starvin', me and Pa and the little fellas, and it was a-rainin'. Fella told us to go to the Salvation Army. Her eyes grew fierce. We was hungry, and they made us crawl for our dinner. They took our dignity. I hate them. And maybe Miss Joyce took charity. Maybe she didn't know this ain't charity. Miss Jode, we don't allow nobody in this camp to build their self up that way. We don't allow nobody to give nothing to another person. They can give it to the camp, and the camp can pass it out. We won't have no charity. Her voice was fierce and hoarse. I hate them, she said. I ain't never seen my man beat before, but them, the Salvation Army, done it to him. Jessie nodded. I heard, she said. I heard. We gotta take Miss Jode around. Ma said, It sure is nice. Let's go to the sewing room, Annie suggested. Got 2 machines. There's a quilting, and they're making dresses. You might like to work over there. When the committee called on Ma, Ruthie and Winfield faded imperceptibly back out of reach. Why don't we go on along and listen? Winfield asked. Ruthie gripped his arm. No, she said. We got washed for them sons of bitches. I ain't going with them. Winfield said, You told on me about the toilet. I'm going to tell what you called them ladies. A shadow of fear crossed Ruthie's face. Don't do it. I told because I know you didn't really break it. You did not, said Winfield. Ruthie said, Let's look around. They strolled down the line of tents, peering into each one, gawking subconsciously. At the end of the unit there was a level place on which a croquet court had been set up. Half a dozen children played seriously. In front of the tent, an elderly lady sat on a bench and watched. Ruthie and Winfield broke into a trot. Leave us play, Ruthie cried. Leave us get in. The children looked up. A pig-tailed little girl said, Next games you can. I want to play now, Ruthie cried. Well, you can't. Not till next game. Ruthie moved menacingly out on the court. I'm going to play. The pig-tailed gripped her mallet tightly. Ruthie sprang at her, slapped her, pushed her, and wrested the mallet from her hands. I said I was going to play. The elderly lady stood up and walked onto the court. Ruthie scowled fiercely. Her hands tightened on the mallet. The lady said, Let her play, like you done with Ralph last week. The children laid their mallets on the ground and trooped silently off the court. They stood at a distance and looked on with expressionless eyes. Ruthie watched them go. Then she hit a ball and ran after it. Come on, Winfield, get a stick, she called. And then she looked in amazement. Winfield had joined the watching children, and he, too, looked at her with expressionless eyes. Defiantly, she hit the ball again. She kicked up a great dust. She pretended to have a good time, and the children stood and watched. Ruthie lined up 2 balls and hit both of them, and she turned her back on the watching eyes and then turned back. Suddenly she advanced on them, mallet in hand. "You come and play," she demanded. They moved silently back at her approach. For a moment she stared at them, and then she flung down the mallet and ran crying for home. The children walked back on the court. Pigtail said to Winfield, "You can get in the next game." The watching lady warned them. "When she comes back and she wants to be decent, you let her. You always mean yourself, Amy." The game went on while in the Joe tent, Ruthie wept miserably. The truck moved along the beautiful roads, past orchards where the peaches were beginning to color, past vineyards with clusters pale and green, under lines of walnut trees whose branches spread half across the road. At each entrance gate Al slowed, and at each gate there was a sign. "No help wanted, no trespassing." Al said, "Pa, they's bound to be work when the fruits get ready. Funny place, they tell you they ain't no work 'fore you ask them." He drove slowly on. Pa said, "Maybe we could go in anyways and ask if they know where there's any work. Might do that." A man in blue overalls and a blue shirt walked along the edge of the road. Al pulled up beside him. "Hey, mister," Al said, "know where there's any work?" The man stopped and grinned, and his mouth was vacant of front teeth. "No," he said. "Do you? I've been walking all week, and I can't tree none." "Live in that government camp?" Al asked. "Yeah." "Come on, then. Get up back, and we'll all look." The man climbed over the sideboards and dropped in the bed. Pa said, "I ain't got no hunch we'll find work. Guess we gotta look, though. We don't even know where to look. Should have talked to the fellows in the camp," Al said. "How you feeling, Uncle John?" "I ache," said Uncle John. "I ache all over, and I got it coming. I ought to go away where I won't bring down this punishment on my own folks." Pa put his hand on Uncle John's knee. "Look here," he said. "Don't you go away. We're dropping folks all the time. Grandpa and Grandma's dead. Noah and Connie run out, and the preacher in jail. I got a hunch we'll see that preacher again," John said. Al fingered the ball on the gear shift lever. "You don't feel good enough to have no hunches," he said. "The hell with it. Let's get back and talk and find out where there's some work. We're just hunting skunks underwater." He stopped the truck and leaned out the window and called back, "Hey, looky. We're going back to the camp and try and see where there's work. They ain't no use in burning gas like this." The man leaned over in the truck side. "Sure is," he said. "Suits me," he said. "My dogs is wore clean up to the ankle, and I ain't even got a nibble." Al turned around in the middle of the road and headed back. Pa said, "Ma's gonna be pretty hurt, especially when Tom got work so easy. Maybe he never got none. Maybe he just went looking too. I wish I could get work in a garage. I'd learn that stuff quick, and I'd like it." Pa grunted, and they drove back toward the camp in silence. When the committee was left, Ma sat down on a box in front of the Joe tent, and she looked helplessly at Rose Sharon. "Well," she said, "I ain't been so perked up in years. Wasn't them ladies nice?" "I gotta work in the nursery," Rose Sharon said. "They told me I can find out all how to do for babies, and then I'll know." Ma nodded in wonder. "Wouldn't it be nice if the men folks all got work?" she asked. "Them a workin' and a little money comin' in?" Her eyes wandered into space. A little ahead. "Them workin' and us workin' here, all them nice people. First thing we get a little ahead, I get me a little stove, nice one. They don't cost much. And then we'd get a tent big enough, and maybe a second-hand springs for the beds. And we'd use this here tent just to eat under. And Saturday night, we'd go to the dancing. And they says you can invite folks if you want. I wish I had some friends to invite. Maybe the men will know someone to invite." Rose Sharon peered down the road. "That lady says thou lose the baby," she began. "Now you stop that," Ma warned her. Rose Sharon said softly, "I seen her. She is a-comin' here, I think. Yeah, here she comes, Ma. Don't let her." Ma turned and looked at the approaching figure. "Howdy," the woman said. "I'm Miss Sandry, Elizabeth Shandry. I seen your girl this morning. Howdy do," said Ma. "Are you happy in the Lord?" "Pretty happy," said Ma. "Are you saved?" "I've been saved." Ma's face was closed and waiting. "Well, I'm glad," Elizabeth said. The sinners is awful strong around here. You come to an awful place. There's wickedness all around about. Wicked people, wicked going on. That's lamb blood Christian just can't hardly stand. There's sinners all around us. Ma colored a little and shut her mouth tightly. Seems to me there's nice people here, she said shortly. Miss Sandry's eyes stared. Nice, she cried. You think they're nice when they's dancing and hugging? I tell ya, your eternal soul ain't got a chance in this here camp. Went out to a meeting in the weed patch last night. Know what the preacher says? He says there's a wickedness in the camp. He says the poor is trying to be rich. He says there's dancing and hugging when they should be a wailing and moaning and sin. That's what he says. Everybody that ain't here is a black sinner. He says, I tell you, it made a person feel pretty good to hear him. And we know we was safe. We ain't danced. Maud's face was red. She stood up slowly and faced Sandry. She said, Get out now, before I get to be a sinner telling you where to go. Get to your wailing and moaning. Miss Sandry's mouth dropped open. She stepped back, and then she became fierce. I thought you was Christians. So we are, Ma said. No, you ain't. You're hell-burning sinners, all of you. And I'll mention that in the meeting, too. I can see your black soul burning. I can see that innocent child in that there girl's belly a-burning. A low wailing cry escaped from Rosa Sharon's lips. Ma stooped down and picked up a stick of wood. Get, she said coldly. Don't you never come back. I seen your kind before. You'd take the little pleasure, wouldn't you? Ma advanced on Miss Sandry. For a moment the woman backed away, and then suddenly she threw back her head and howled. Her eyes rolled up, her shoulders and arms flopped loosely at her sides, and a string of thick, ropey saliva ran down from the corner of her mouth. She howled again and again, long, deep animal howls. Men and women ran up from the other tents, and they stood near, frightened and quiet. Slowly the woman sank to her knees, and the howls twitched. The white eyeballs showed under the open eyelids. A man said softly, The spirit. She got the spirit. Ma stood down, looking at the twitching form. The little manager strolled up casually. Trouble? He asked. The crowd parted and let him through. He looked down at the woman. Too bad, he said. Will some of you help her get back to her tent? The silent people shuffled their feet. Two men bent over and lifted the woman. One held her under the arms, and the other took her feet. They carried her away, and the people moved slowly after them. Rosa Sharon went under the tarpaulin and lay down and covered her face with a blanket. The manager looked at Ma, looked down at the stick in her hand. He smiled tightly. Did you clout her? He said. Ma continued to stare after the retreating people. She shook her head slowly. No, but I woulda. Twice today. She worked my girl up. The manager said, Try not to hurt her. She isn't well. She just isn't well. And he added softly, I wish she'd go away, all her family. She brings more trouble on the camp than all the rest of her together. Ma got herself in hand again. If she comes back, I might hit her. I ain't sure. I won't let her worry my girl no more. Don't worry about it, Miss Jode. You won't ever see her again. She works over the newcomers. She won't ever come back. She thinks you're a sinner. Well, I am, said Ma. Sure, everybody is. But not the way she means. She just isn't well, Miss Jode. Ma looked at him gratefully, and then she called, You hear that, Rose Sharon? She ain't well. She's crazy. But the girl did not raise her head. Ma said, I'm warning you, mister. If she comes back, I ain't to be trusted. I'll hit her. He smiled wryly. I know how you feel, he said, but just try not to. That's all I ask. Just try not to. He walked slowly away toward the tent where Miss Sandry had been carried. Ma went into the tent and sat down beside Rose Sharon. Look up, she said. The girl lay still. Ma gently lifted the blanket from her daughter's face. That woman's kind of crazy, she said. Don't you believe none of them things? Rose Sharon whispered in terror. When she said about burning, I felt burning. That ain't true. Ma said, I'm tired out, the girl whispered. I'm tired of things happening. I want to sleep. I want to sleep. Well, you sleep then. This here's a nice place. You can sleep. But she might come back. She won't, said Ma. I'm gonna sit right outside, and I won't let her come back. Rest up now, 'cause you got to get to work in the nursery pretty soon. Ma struggled to her feet and went to sit in the entrance of the tent. She sat on a box and put her elbows on her knees and her chin and in her cupped hands. She saw the movement in the camp, heard the voices of the children, the hammering of an iron but the eyes were staring ahead of her. Pa, coming back along the road, found her there, and he squatted near her. She looked slowly over at him. Get work, she asked. No, he said, ashamed. We looked. Where's Al and John in the truck? Al's fixing something. Had to borrow some tools. The fella says Al got to fix her there. Ma said sadly, this here's a nice place. We could be happy here a while. If we could get work. Yeah, if you could get work. He felt her sadness and studied her face. What are you moping about? If it's such a nice place, why have you got to mope? She gazed at him, and she closed her eyes slowly. Funny, ain't it? All the time we was movin' and a-shovin', I never thought none. And now, these here folks been nice to me, been awful nice, and what's the first thing I do? I go right back over the sad things. That night, Grandpa died, and we buried him. I was all full up of the road, and bumpin' and movin', and it was so bad. But now, I come out here, and it's worse now. And Grandma and Noah walking away just like that, walking away just down the river. Them things was part of all. And now they come flocking back. Grandma a pauper and buried a pauper. That's sharp now. That's awful sharp. And Noah walking away down the river. He don't know what's there. He just don't know. And we don't know. We ain't never gonna know if he's alive or dead. Never gonna know. And Connie sneaking away. I didn't give him brain room before, but now they're flocking back, and I oughta be glad, because we're in a nice place. Pa watched her mouth while she talked. Her eyes were closed. I can remember how the mountains was, sharp as old teeth beside the river where Noah walked. I can remember how the stubble was on the ground where Grandpa lay. I can remember the chopping block back home with a feather caught in it, in all crisscrossed with cuts, and black with chicken blood. Pa's voice took her on her tongue. I seen the ducks today, he said, wedging south, high up. It seems like they're awful dinky. And I seen them blackbirds sitting on the wires, and the doves was on the fences. Ma opened her eyes and looked at him. He went on. I seen a little whirlwind, like a man spinning across the field, and the ducks driving on down, wedging down to the southward. Ma smiled. Remember, she said, remember what we'd always say at home? Winter's a-comin' early, we say, when the ducks flew. Always said that, and winter come when it was ready to come. We always said, she's a-comin' early. I wonder what we meant. I seen the blackbirds on the wire, said Pa, sitting so close together. And the doves. Nothing sat so still as a dove on the fence wires, maybe two, side by side, and this little whirlwind, big as a man, and dancing off across the field. Always did like little fellows, big as a man. Wish I wouldn't think how it is home, said Ma. It ain't our home no more. Wished I'd forget. And Noah, he wasn't ever right. I mean, well, it was my fault. I told you never to say that. Wouldn't have lived at all, maybe. But I should have known more. Now stop. Noah's strange. Maybe he'll have a nice time by the river. Maybe it's better so. We can't do no work. This here's a nice place, and maybe you'll get work right off. Pa pointed at the sky. Look, more ducks. Big bunch. And Ma, winter's coming. Early. She chuckled. There's things you do, and you don't know why. Here's John. Come and sit, John. John joined them. He squatted down in front of Ma. We didn't get nowheres, he said, just running around. Say, Al wants to see you. Says he gotta get a tire. Only one layer of cloth left, he says. Pa stood up. I hope he can get her cheap. We ain't got much left. Where's Al? Down there. To the next cross street and turn right. Says gonna blow out and spoil it too if we don't get a new one. Pa strolled away, and his eyes followed the giant V of the ducks down the sky. Uncle John picked up a stone from the ground and dropped it in his palm, and picked it up again. He did not look at Ma. They ain't no work, he said. He didn't look all over. No, but they signs out. Well, Tom must have got work. He ain't been back. Uncle John suggested. Maybe he went away, like Connie or like Noah. Ma glanced sharply at him, and then her eyes softened. "They's things you know," she said. "They's stuff you're sure of. Tom got work, and he'll come in this evening. That's true." She smiled in satisfaction. "Ain't he a fine boy?" she said. "Ain't he a good boy?" The cars and trucks began to come into the camp, and the men trooped by toward the sanitary unit. Each man carried clean overalls and a shirt in his hand. Ma pulled herself together. "John, you go find Pa. Get to the store. I want beans and sugar and a piece of fried meat and carrots, and tell Pa to get something nice. Anything but nice for tonight. Tonight we'll have something nice."